My name is Alina Me Whittaker, and I'm 78 years old. I live on the edge of a quiet town in North Carolina, where the air smells like pine trees and diesel, and the nights are still enough to hear the crickets argue. For most of my life, I was the kind of woman who baked pies for Sunday service and sent birthday cards on time. I raised 3 children, buried my husband, and trusted my family to love me the way I loved them. But I was wrong. Very wrong. Because one Sunday night, sitting in the back seat of my own SUV, I realized my family had planned to kill me. The smell of gasoline hit first. It was faint at the start, just a whisper that made my stomach turn. Then it grew thick, choking the air inside that car. My hands trembled on my lap, veins blue and thin under my skin, as I stared at my grandson in the driver's seat. "Grandma," he said softly, not looking back, "you don't need to worry about a thing. We're taking care of everything." Taking care of everything. The same words he'd said when he convinced me to sign those retirement papers. The same words my daughter used when she told me I didn't need to check my mail anymore. That was the night I understood. They weren't taking care of me. They were cashing me in. And the truth hit harder than the heat rising in that car. There was a $5 million life insurance policy in my name. A policy I didn't even know existed. Now, before I tell you how I made it out alive, and how I made every single one of them face what they did to me, I need you to do something for me. If you're new here, make sure you hit the subscribe button, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the rest of this unbelievable story. And tell me in the comments below where you're watching from. I love knowing which part of the country my friends are listening from, whether you're in Texas, Florida, or up in Maine. Because this story, it's for every grandmother, every mother, and every soul who's ever been betrayed by the ones they raised. I was supposed to burn that night, but I didn't. When the flames began to rise outside that SUV, I did something none of them saw coming. And that, my dear listener, is where the real story begins. Before that night of fire and betrayal, my days were simple. I woke up early, brewed my coffee strong, and watched the sunrise spill over the cotton fields beyond my porch. I'd been living in Maple Hollow, a small North Carolina town where everyone knows who bakes the best pies, and everyone waves even if they don't like you. I'd lived in that white farmhouse for 42 years. My late husband, Franklin Whittaker, built it with his own hands when we were newlyweds. He was a man of the old world, worked hard, never complained, and kept every promise he made. When he passed, the house felt too big, too quiet, and too full of ghosts. But I stayed, because that's what you do when everything you love is buried in the soil beneath your feet. After Franklin died, my daughter Lorraine started visiting more often. At first, I was grateful. She brought groceries, took me to doctor's appointments, and said things like, "Mama, you don't need to worry about bills anymore." But slowly, I began to feel something colder behind her kindness. She stopped calling me Mama and started calling me Alina. She started keeping my mail. She started bringing her husband, Calvin, to talk business. Calvin always wore those shiny loafers that squeaked on the floor and smiled too long before saying anything. "We're just trying to make sure you're comfortable, Alina," he'd say, pouring himself sweet tea without asking. Then came the papers. One afternoon, Lorraine sat me down at the kitchen table, the same one where I taught her how to read, and placed a stack of documents in front of me. "It's just retirement stuff, Mama," she said. "We're updating your account so you can get better benefits. Sign here, here, and here." I looked at those pages, the words blurred in places. I asked what they were for, but she brushed it off. "It's all standard. Everyone's doing it now." So I signed. That's what trust does to old folks like me. You sign because you believe your children wouldn't hurt you. What I didn't know then was that one of those papers had my name printed next to a life insurance policy worth $5 million, and my daughter and her husband were the beneficiaries. The moment I signed my name, my death became a business plan. Weeks later, little things started going missing. My wedding ring, my checkbook, My medication bottles had fewer pills than before. Lorraine said maybe I misplaced them, but my gut told me otherwise. My grandson Derek started visiting, too. He used to be my sweet boy, the one who'd pick dandelions and bring them to me in a jelly jar. But now, his smile was tight, his eyes restless. He'd ask strange questions. "Grandma, do you ever get scared living out here alone? Do you ever think about what would happen if something went wrong?" At first, I thought he was just worried about me. But one night, I overheard a phone call in the hallway. His voice was low. "She trusts me. It'll look like an accident, don't worry." I froze, my own grandson's voice talking about me. The walls of that old house felt like they were closing in. The memories of birthdays, Christmas mornings, and the laughter we once shared, all of it turned sour. The next morning, I packed a small bag and hid it behind the furnace, just in case. I started writing down everything: dates, conversations, little things that didn't sit right. I may have been old, but I wasn't helpless. I'd survived too much to go quietly. And then came the Sunday dinner that changed everything. Lorraine said Derek would drive me home afterward. That was the night they tried to make sure I never made it home again. But they didn't know that I had already begun to suspect them. They didn't know I'd placed something in that car hours before the ride even started. Something that would change everything. By the time that Sunday came around, I had already spent 2 months pretending to be the same fragile old woman they thought I was. I smiled at their fake concern. I nodded when they offered help. And I thanked them when they said I shouldn't worry about my finances. But inside, I was counting every move they made. I'd learned a lot from my late husband, Franklin. He used to say, "Alina, when people think you're weak, that's when you can see their true face." That voice echoed in my mind the week before they planned my death. I knew something was coming. I could feel it in the way Lorraine kept checking the clock when she visited, the way Calvin avoided my eyes, the way Derek kept glancing at my car keys. So I prepared. I walked down to the local thrift store one morning, moving slow, leaning on my cane like a helpless old bird. I told the young clerk I needed something to record my memories. She smiled and handed me a tiny digital voice recorder. It was second-hand, scratched up, and fit right in my palm. I told her I'd be using it for a family project. She had no idea what kind of family I meant. That little recorder became my secret weapon. I hid it deep inside the lining of my old handbag, the one I always carried. Every time Lorraine or Derek came around, I'd press the button and let it capture their words. At first, it was just small talk. But then, one night, Derek came by when he thought I was asleep. His voice was clear on that recorder. "Yeah, she signed it. 5 million. Once we're done, I'll drive the car to the back road. Gasoline burns fast." I listened to that recording over and over. The words cut like knives. My own flesh and blood, planning to burn me alive. But instead of crying, I smiled, because now I had proof. That week, I called my neighbor, Mildred, a retired nurse who lived across the field. She was sharp and stubborn as a mule, and the only one I still trusted. I told her I needed her help with something but didn't give details. I just asked her to check on me that Sunday evening, around 8 o'clock, if she didn't hear from me. Then, the morning of the accident, I packed that recorder again. This time, I set it under the driver's seat of my SUV, hidden in a little pouch I'd stitched myself. I also tucked a folded note under the floor mat with 3 words. "If I die, listen." By sunset, the plan was already in motion. Lorraine and Calvin arrived all dressed up for Sunday dinner. They smiled like we were one big happy family. Calvin even brought flowers, cheap ones from the gas station. After dinner, Lorraine said gently, "Mama, Derek will drive you home tonight. We'll follow behind just to be safe." I nodded, pretended not to see the nervous glance she gave her husband. On the way to the car, Derek slipped an arm around me like a dutiful grandson. "You're my favorite person, Grandma," he said, opening the door for me. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed him. We drove for a while in silence. The night was quiet, the road dark except for the headlights cutting through the mist. Then I noticed it again, that sharp, choking smell of gasoline. It was faint at first, then thicker, stronger. My heart pounded, but I didn't move. I kept my face calm. I waited. Derek parked the car by the old mill road. He stepped out and said, "Stay here, Grandma. I'll be right back. Gotta check something." I watched him walk to the back of the SUV, open the trunk, and reach inside. The faint flicker of a lighter flashed against his face. That's when I pressed the button on my handbag. A small red light blinked once. The recorder was live. But what Derek didn't know was that I wasn't the only one waiting that night. Mildred, bless her stubborn heart, was parked half a mile down the road, watching through binoculars. She had promised she'd call 911 if anything looked wrong. The lighter clicked again, but this time Derek froze. The sound of a car engine approached from behind. Headlights swept across us. He panicked, threw something on the ground, and jumped back into the driver's seat. "Might be cops," he muttered, forcing a laugh. "Let's go home, Grandma." I just nodded. Inside, I was shaking, but not from fear, from victory. The game had changed. Because that night, I caught everything: the gasoline, the confession, the panic on that tiny recorder. And soon, it would become the key to bringing them all down. But before I could expose them, something even darker happened. The next morning, Lorraine showed up at my house early, with tears in her eyes and a black folder in her hand. "Mama," she said, voice trembling, "we need to talk. It's about the will." The will. That's when I realized their plan wasn't over. It was only getting deeper. They thought I was an old woman waiting to die. But I was a survivor waiting to fight. If you haven't yet, like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. And tell me in the comments what part of the country you're watching from. I love knowing where my family of listeners is growing. The morning after that near-death ride, the sky looked strange. The kind of gray that makes you think the world's holding its breath. I hadn't slept much. The recorder was still in my handbag, humming with secrets. Every sound from the night before, every word, was trapped inside it like ghosts that couldn't rest. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee that had gone cold. That's when I heard the knock. Sharp, fast, the kind of knock people use when they're carrying guilt. I opened the door, and there stood Lorraine, dressed in black slacks and a cream blouse, her hair pulled too tight, her eyes swollen from fake tears. She was holding a black leather folder against her chest. "Mama," she said softly, "we need to talk. It's about Daddy's will." That word hit me like a shovel. Will. Franklin's will had been settled years ago. He left me the house, the land, and a small pension. It wasn't much, but it was enough. We'd always been honest about what we had. So hearing her bring it up again didn't sit right. "What about it?" I asked, my voice firm. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "We've been reviewing some documents, and there's a problem. Calvin been working with the county office, and it looks like there's a mistake in the original paperwork. Daddy's assets might not be properly transferred to you." I stared at her. "What are you talking about, Lorraine? That man, been dead 10 years, the farm's in my name." She forced a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, legally, maybe not anymore." She laid the folder on the table and opened it. Inside were new documents, typed, stamped, and dated just a few weeks ago. At the top of one page in bold letters were the words, "Revised ownership and beneficiary transfer." And right there under beneficiary was her name. Not mine. I felt my hands go cold. "You forged this," I whispered. "Mama, no one's forging anything. We're just making sure things are in order before you're gone." "Before I'm gone." She said it so easily, like I was a piece of furniture waiting to be moved. I looked at her, really looked at her. The little girl I once rocked to sleep, who used to cry over scraped knees and beg me to make pancakes on Saturdays. Now she stood there trying to erase me from my own life. That's when I saw it, the faint burn mark on her wrist. I knew that mark. Gasoline burns leave those. Derek's lighter must have sputtered close to her when they tested their little plan. So she had been part of it all along. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice calm. Well, Lorraine, I suppose we'll have to see what the county clerk says about all this. She flinched. What do you mean? Oh, I think I'll pay them a visit tomorrow, I said. You know, just to double-check what my husband left behind. I've always liked the truth straight from the source. She forced a laugh, too high-pitched. There's no need for that, Mama. Calvin already handled it, it's done. But her hands were shaking as she gathered the papers. After she left, I sat there for a long while, staring at the dust dancing in the light. 10 years. 10 years since Franklin died, and now I began to wonder if he had really gone the way they said he did. They said it was a heart attack. Sudden, peaceful, but I remembered things differently. His coffee that morning had smelled bitter. His face had gone gray before he fell, and Lorraine had been the one to pour his cup. The thought twisted in my chest like a knife. Could they have done it before? I needed answers. That afternoon, I drove to the county record's office. The young clerk looked up Franklin's file for me. It took a while, but when he found it, his brow furrowed. Ma'am, he said, this document was modified recently. Someone requested a change of ownership just 2 weeks ago. That shouldn't even be possible without your authorization. Who signed it? I asked. He looked at the file again. It says E. Whittaker. My stomach dropped. They had forged my signature. I thanked him and walked out slowly, trying to keep my breathing steady. I could feel the weight of the recorder in my bag. I had the proof of their murder plot, and now I had evidence of fraud. But if I made one wrong move, they could finish what they started before I ever reached justice. That night I called Mildred again. I told her everything about the forged will, the life insurance, and the attempt on my life. She wanted to call the sheriff right then, but I told her no, not yet. Because I wasn't ready to survive. I was ready to win. I began setting traps, quiet ones. Copies of the recordings went to a safety deposit box. My lawyer, Mr. Beasley, an old friend of Franklin, received a sealed envelope labeled, "Only open if Alina Whittaker is missing or deceased." The next Sunday, Lorraine and Calvin invited me over again. They said they wanted to start fresh. But when I arrived, I noticed something strange. Derek wasn't there. Lorraine said he'd gone away for a while. But 2 days later, I found his car abandoned by the river. And that's when I realized the plan had changed. Someone wasn't cleaning up the mess. They were removing witnesses. They tried to bury me in silence. But they forgot. I was still breathing. The morning Derek's car was found, the whole town buzzed like hornets. Maple Hollow hadn't seen this kind of gossip in years. Folks at the diner whispered over their coffee cups, their voices low, their eyes darting toward my direction. I pretended not to notice. I just sat by the window of my kitchen, stirring my oatmeal until it turned cold. The police cruiser rolled past my house twice before finally stopping. A young officer stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Mrs. Whittaker," he called out, "we need to ask you a few questions." I invited him in. His name was Deputy Alan Price, a polite young man who still said, "Ma'am," like his mama raised him right. He sat across from me, removing his hat. "We found your grandson's car by the river this morning," he began. "Keys still in the ignition, no sign of him." I tilted my head slightly. "Did you find blood?" He looked surprised. "Just a few drops near the driver's door. You knew about any trouble he might have been in." I smiled faintly. "Officer, trouble followed that boy long before this." He took notes, glancing up now and then. "Family says he's been dealing with stress lately. That true?" "Stress," I said, leaning back in my chair. "That's an interesting word for plotting to kill your grandmother." He froze. His pen hovered over the notepad. "Ma'am." I reached for my bag, unzipped it slowly, and slid the tiny recorder across the table. "You might want to listen to what's on there before you call this a missing persons case." He blinked, unsure what to say. "Play it," I insisted. "You'll hear everything, the planning, the gasoline, the lighter." He hesitated but nodded, slipping the recorder into an evidence bag. "I'll take this to the sheriff right away." When he left, I locked the door behind him and exhaled for the first time in days. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, from release. The truth was finally out. Or so I thought. That afternoon, Lorraine came storming into the house like a tornado. Her makeup was smeared, her hair messy, and her eyes red from crying. "What did you tell the police, Mama?" she screamed. I stayed calm, only the truth. "You're ruining us," she shouted. "You don't understand. Derek's missing. He could be dead." "I understand perfectly," I said. "I understand you and Calvin have been playing a game you don't know how to finish." Her lips quivered. "We didn't mean for it to go this far." "Oh, I think you did," I replied softly. "You just didn't think I'd still be here to tell anyone." She broke down then, collapsed into the nearest chair, sobbing into her hands. "Calvin said it would be easy," she muttered. "Just paperwork. No one would get hurt. Then Derek got scared. He wanted out. Calvin said he'd take care of it." My heart went cold. "Take care of it? Lorraine, what do you mean?" She looked up at me, eyes wide with terror. "He said Derek knew too much." The room went silent. For a moment, all I could hear was the faint tick of the kitchen clock and the sound of my own heartbeat. I stood slowly. "Get out of my house, Lorraine." "Mama, please." I said get out. She stumbled to her feet and ran out the door, her cries echoing down the dirt road. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboard made my heart jump. The shadows seemed to move on their own. Then, sometime after midnight, headlights swept across my window, stopped, and went dark. I didn't move. I just reached under the table and picked up the revolver Franklin had left me. Footsteps approached the porch, slow, heavy. A man's voice called out, low and familiar. "Eleanor, open up. We need to talk." It was Calvin. I didn't answer. "I know you've been talking to the cops," he said. "That's not smart, old woman." His voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. I kept the lights off and stood behind the curtain, my heart pounding in my ears. Then came the sound of metal against glass. He was trying to pry the window open. I cocked the gun. The click was loud enough to cut through the night. "Try that again," I said, "and you'll be the one they find by the river." Silence. Then footsteps retreating, the sound of a truck door slamming, tires spinning in the gravel. I stood there shaking, but I didn't lower the gun until I couldn't hear the engine anymore. The next morning, Deputy Price came back. He looked tired. "Mrs. Whittaker, I listened to that recording. You were right, but there's more." We found Derek's phone downstream. "There's a voicemail on it from your son-in-law, time-stamped the night before he vanished." He played it for me. Calvin's voice was rough, angry. "You don't back out now, boy. You made your choice. You talk and we all burn." I closed my eyes. Now I knew for certain Derek hadn't run. Calvin had silenced him. And if he'd done that to his own nephew, then I was next. But what Calvin didn't know was that I had one more surprise waiting. Something Franklin had left behind all those years ago, a truth buried deeper than any of them realized. They thought I was the victim, but I was the storm they didn't see coming. The morning after Calvin tried to break into my house, the air outside was damp and heavy, like the world itself was warning me to stay quiet. But I didn't listen. I'd spent too many years keeping still, too many nights letting fear whisper louder than my own strength. That time was over. I sat in the living room, staring at Franklin's old wooden desk. It had been his pride and joy, a heavy thing with brass handles and secret compartments I'd never fully explored. After he died, I couldn't bring myself to touch it much. I'd dust it every now and then, maybe place a photo frame on top, but I'd never open the bottom drawer. Until that morning. I pulled the drawer open, half expecting to find nothing but old tax papers and a few pens. Instead, something slid loose from underneath the wooden panel. A ledger, bound in cracked leather, with Franklin's initials burned into the cover. Inside, the handwriting was his, neat and deliberate. But these weren't farm accounts or church donations. Page after page listed names, dates, and amounts of money. Some were small, others shockingly large. At the top of one page, the words made my blood run cold. Lorraine and Calvin, advance $25,000. Repayment in full upon insurance claim. Insurance claim. He had known. My husband had somehow seen this coming, years before it happened. I kept turning the pages, my heart pounding harder with every line. I found entries for Calvin partnership and property transfer pending, and on the very last page, a note written in red ink. Franklin's final message. If anything happens to me or a leaner, this ledger is the truth. Trust Beasley. My lawyer, Mr. Beasley, the same man I'd already sent a sealed envelope to. I sat there for a long while, the morning light creeping through the curtains. Franklin had tried to warn me, maybe even tried to protect me from them, but I hadn't seen it, not until now. Before noon, I called Mr. Beasley. He answered on the first ring, his deep voice steady as always. "Eleanor," he said, "I was about to call you. The sheriff's office just delivered that recorder you mentioned. They've opened a full investigation. Calvin and Lorraine have both been called in for questioning." I told him about the ledger. There was a pause on the line, then a low whistle. "Eleanor," he said slowly, "this changes everything. These entries, if they connect to the life insurance paperwork, this isn't just attempted murder. It's financial fraud and conspiracy." I closed the ledger, my hands trembling. "What do we do?" "You let me handle the law," he said. "You stay safe. Don't go anywhere alone." That night, I locked the doors and sat by the window with the lights off, watching the dirt road outside. My gut told me Calvin wouldn't go quietly. Around 10, I saw headlights again, but this time they didn't stop. They slowed, then sped off down toward the old barn at the edge of the property. That barn hadn't been used in years. Franklin had boarded it up after the roof started sagging, but something told me Calvin wasn't there to reminisce. I slipped on my coat and grabbed my flashlight. My heart thudded with every step as I crept across the yard, the grass wet under my shoes. The barn door was half open. Inside, the air smelled of oil and dust and something sharper, gasoline again. I shone my light across the floor. There were fresh footprints. A jerry can tipped over. And near the center of the room, Franklin's old safe, the one Calvin had begged to help me open years ago. It was pried open now, empty. A noise behind me made me turn. A shadow moved. Then Calvin stepped into the light, his face twisted with rage. "You should have stayed quiet, Eleanor," he said, voice low. "You and that old man of yours just couldn't stop meddling." I raised my flashlight higher, my voice steady. "You killed your own nephew, Calvin. You forged Franklin's will, and you tried to burn me alive." He sneered. "You think anyone's gonna believe you? You're an old woman. Half the town thinks you're losing your mind." "That's what you're counting on, isn't it?" I said. "That people underestimate me." He took a step forward. "You're gonna hand me that ledger or—" He didn't finish his sentence, because at that moment, bright lights flooded the barn. Sheriff's Department, hands up. Deputy Price and 2 officers stormed in, guns drawn. Calvin froze like a trapped animal. I exhaled slowly. "You should know," I said. "Mildred's been watching from her porch all night. She saw you drive in." The deputies cuffed him without another word. As they let him out, Calvin spat over his shoulder. "You think you've won, old woman. You don't know what's coming." But I did. Because with Calvin in custody, the rest of their lives were about to crumble. The next morning, Mr. Beasley met me at the sheriff's office. He'd already cross-referenced Franklin's ledger with bank records. The money trails matched. Calvin and Lorraine had taken out multiple fraudulent policies, not just in my name, but in others too. People they thought no one would miss. When I saw Lorraine in the interrogation room later that day, her face was pale, her eyes hollow. She didn't speak, not once. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. Pity for the child I'd raised, who lost herself in greed. But even as justice began to turn in my favor, something in my heart told me it wasn't over. Derek was still missing. The police had found his blood, but not his body. And that night, as I sat alone in my living room, I heard a faint knock at the door. Slow, uncertain. When I opened it, my heart nearly stopped. Because standing there in the dim porch light was Derek. Dirty, shaking, alive. When I opened the door and saw Derek standing there, I thought I was seeing a ghost. His face was pale, his clothes soaked, and his eyes looked hollow, like someone who'd seen too much to ever go back to who they were. He stood on my porch shivering, his lips trembling. "Grandma," he whispered. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't hesitate. I reached out, pulled him into my arms, and felt his body shaking like a leaf in the wind. He smelled of mud, river water, and gasoline. "Come inside, sweetheart," I said, guiding him in. "You're safe now." He collapsed into the old armchair by the fire, his breath coming in short bursts. I wrapped him in a blanket and handed him a cup of tea. For a few minutes, he said nothing, just stared into the flames like they might reach out and swallow him whole. Finally, he spoke. He tried to kill me, Grandma. My hands froze around the teacup. "Who?" "Calvin," his voice cracked. "I told him I couldn't go through with it. I didn't want to hurt you. I told Mom too. She cried, said it was too late, that we were all in it now. But I couldn't, so I told Calvin I was going to the sheriff." I felt my stomach twist. "What happened at the river?" Derek swallowed hard. "He told me to meet him there, said he'd help me disappear for a while, let things cool off." I believed him. But when I got there, he hit me from behind. I woke up in the water. I don't know how long I was out, but the current must have pulled me to the bank downstream. When I crawled out, he was gone. Tears slid down his cheeks, carving lines through the dirt on his face. I thought he'd killed me. I thought I was dead. I took his hand gently. "You came back, Derek. You came back for the truth." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "I have to tell them everything. About the insurance, about the plan, about Mom." I could see the pain in his eyes when he said her name. Lorraine had raised him alone after his father left, and now she was sitting in a jail cell for plotting to murder her own mother. It broke him in ways no words could mend. I told him about the ledger, about the recording, about Calvin's arrest. For the first time that night, a flicker of relief crossed his face. "He deserves to rot," Derek said quietly. "But I don't think he's done. He said something before he hit me." "What did he say?" Derek hesitated. His voice dropped to a whisper. "He said there was someone else, someone helping him, someone who wanted you dead long before he did." A chill ran down my spine. "Who?" "I don't know," he said, "but he called them the partner." We both sat in silence, the fire crackling between us. I could feel the weight of Franklin's ledger on the mantel behind me, that old book of secrets. And suddenly, something clicked in my mind, something I'd missed before. The entries didn't stop with Calvin and Lorraine. There was another name, one that Franklin had written several times, underlined twice: M. Yates. I got up, walked to the mantel, and opened the ledger. There it was again. M. Yates, consultation fee, 2012. M. Yates, policy setup assistance, 2013. Derek frowned. "Who's that?" I whispered the name like it was poison. "Martin Yates, the insurance broker who handled our policies after Franklin died. The same man who convinced Lorraine to sign those retirement papers." It hit me like lightning. The real puppeteer wasn't just family. It was the man who'd sold them the plan in the first place. The next morning, I took Derek to the sheriff's office. Deputy Price nearly fell out of his chair when he saw him alive. They took his statement right away. When Derek mentioned the name Martin Yates, the sheriff's face darkened. "We've been after him before," he said. "Suspected him of scamming seniors across the state, setting up fake policies, manipulating families into collecting the payouts. But we could never prove it." Now they could. Between Franklin's ledger, my recording, and Derek's testimony, they had everything they needed. By evening, the news spread through Maple Hollow like wildfire. Calvin Whitaker and insurance broker Martin Yates arrested in connection with a murder-for-profit scheme. Lorraine's charges were lighter. She turned herself in, gave a full confession, and agreed to testify. I went home that night with Derek. We sat on the porch as the sun went down, the cicadas singing their endless song. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace trying to find its way back into my heart. Derek looked at me and said softly, "Grandma, I'm so sorry." I placed my hand over his. "You're not your mother and you're not him. You came back when you didn't have to. That means something." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "we heal, and we tell the truth no matter who it hurts." But as the last light faded, I looked across the field toward the old barn and thought of Calvin's last words before they took him away. "You don't know what's coming." And in my heart, I knew this story wasn't finished yet. Because Martin Yates wasn't working alone. The morning after Derek's return, Maple Hollow felt different. The air was clear, the sky was blue, and for the first time in months, I didn't wake up to fear. But beneath that calm, I could feel something moving, like the earth shifting under quiet ground. The sheriff's office called me before sunrise. They'd found something in Martin Yates' office, the insurance broker who had been behind everything. "You'd better come down here, Mrs. Whitaker," Deputy Price said. "You need to see this for yourself." I drove into town, Derek in the passenger seat. The police station was buzzing with reporters and flashing lights. Inside, the walls were lined with boxes, dozens of them, labeled with names, dates, and numbers. Each box was a person. Each person a target. The sheriff met me at the door. "Eleanor," he said quietly, "we think Yates ran a whole network. He'd approach families in debt, promise them financial relief, then convince them to take out life insurance policies on their elders. When the elders passed, the family got a cut, and Yates collected the rest." My throat went dry. "How many?" He sighed. "At least 20 so far, maybe more. Some of the victims' families never even knew the policies existed." I looked down at one of the open files. My name was on the top sheet, right beside it, Franklin. A chill ran through me. "He did this to my husband too, didn't he?" The sheriff nodded slowly. "We're still investigating, but the evidence suggests Franklin's heart attack might not have been natural. There's residue from a compound in his toxicology report, one that can cause cardiac arrest. That report was altered before it was filed." I staggered back, gripping the edge of the desk. Franklin hadn't just died. He'd been murdered, so quietly that no one ever looked twice. My mind raced. Lorraine and Calvin might have been the greedy ones, but Martin Yates had orchestrated it all. He'd planted the seed, groomed them, turned my family into monsters for profit. And now, he was sitting in a cell, smug and unrepentant. "Can I see him?" I asked. The sheriff hesitated. "Eleanor, that's not a good idea." "I won't touch him," I said. "I just need to look him in the eye." A few minutes later, they led me into the interview room. Yates was sitting there, his suit wrinkled, his hands cuffed, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, still held the same arrogance of a man who thought he was untouchable. "Well," he said with a smirk, "the famous Eleanor Whitaker, you're quite the survivor." I took a seat across from him. "You killed my husband, you nearly killed me, you turned my daughter against me. Why?" He leaned back in his chair. "Because people are easy, Mrs. Whitaker. They'll trade blood for comfort. You raise them to want love, but the world teaches them to want more. I just give them what they think they deserve." I stared at him for a long moment. "You'll rot for what you did." He smiled. "You really believe that? I've got names higher than your sheriff. Judges, attorneys, politicians, all with policies they'd rather not discuss. You think they'll let an old woman like you tear that down?" The room went silent. Then I said quietly, "You're right, they won't, but I will." He frowned. "What?" "I have your ledger copies. Every document Franklin saved, every recording, every transfer. And I've already mailed them to a journalist in Raleigh who's waiting for my call. If anything happens to me or Derek, or if that story doesn't air in 2 days, every piece of evidence goes public." For the first time, the smirk faded from his face. I stood up slowly. "You built an empire of greed, Mr. Yates. But you made one mistake. You underestimated the power of a woman with nothing left to lose." I walked out before he could say another word. 2 days later, the story broke on every major news network in the state. "Insurance scandal uncovered. Broker linked to senior deaths across 4 counties." Families started coming forward. Lawsuits were filed. The company Yates had built for decades crumbled overnight. Lorraine's confession helped seal the case. Calvin's plea deal failed when new evidence surfaced, and he faced the rest of his life behind bars. As for me, I didn't celebrate. I just sat on my porch with Derek and watched the sunset bleed across the fields. Justice doesn't always come with cheering, it comes with quiet. Mama would have wanted to say sorry, Derek said softly. I know, I replied. Maybe one day she'll find peace, but she'll have to earn it. He nodded, staring out at the horizon. Are you going to tell the world about Grandpa now? I looked down at my hands, the wrinkles, the veins, the years. No, I said. I already did. Every truth I had to tell is out there now. The rest belongs to God. But even as I said it, something in my gut told me this wasn't over. Because that night, I got a letter. No return address. Just my name written in block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper. One sentence. You silenced one, but not all. And beneath it, a name I hadn't seen before. J. Vance, Corporate Counsel, Yates and Partners. The partner behind the partner. 3 weeks after the scandal broke, the world had already moved on. Reporters found new stories, the town settled back into its slow rhythm, and the nights in Maple Hollow grew quiet again. But I couldn't rest. Not with that letter sitting on my kitchen table, the ink on those 5 words burned into my memory. You silenced one, but not all. The name written underneath, J. Vance, haunted me. I asked the sheriff, the district attorney, even the state investigator, but no one seemed to know much. Just that Jonathan Vance had been Martin Yates' business partner years ago before retiring to the city. A man with money, connections, and the kind of charm that made people trust him too easily. When I tried to sleep, I saw Franklin's face. When I woke, I saw the letter. Every instinct in me said it wasn't over. So I made a decision. If no one else was going to stop this man, I would. Derek tried to talk me out of it. Grandma, please, you've done enough. Let the law handle it. But the law hadn't protected my husband. It hadn't protected me. It sure hadn't protected the other families whose parents had been sold like stock shares. No, sweetheart, I said, packing a small bag. Sometimes justice wears a badge, and sometimes it wears an old woman's cardigan. I took the bus to Charlotte, where Vance's office was listed. A tall glass tower downtown bore his name, Vance Financial Group. I sat across the street in a small cafe, watching men in suits move in and out, their shoes clicking on marble. It took 2 days before I finally saw him. He looked younger than I expected, maybe in his 60s, with silver hair slicked back and a confident gait. A man who'd spent a lifetime believing no one could touch him. That evening, I attended one of his public philanthropy events. I wore Franklin's old pearl brooch, a soft blue dress, and a smile that didn't give away a thing. The room was full of wine glasses, polite laughter, and hollow words about building trust in financial futures. When Vance came down from the podium, I stepped right into his path. Mr. Vance, I said, my voice steady. Eleanor Whittaker, we need to talk. He smiled, professional but cautious. Of course, are you a client? Not exactly. I'm the widow of one of Martin Yates' clients, Franklin Whittaker. His face twitched, just for a moment. Then he composed himself. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. I had no involvement with Mr. Yates' personal dealings. Oh, I think you did, I said, pulling a small flash drive from my purse. This holds every transfer Yates made over 15 years. I found your name attached to more than half of them. The color drained from his face. Now, I continued softly, I could go to the press, or I could give you a chance to make this right. He leaned closer. What do you want? I smiled faintly. Everything you stole from every family you ruined returned. Every cent donated to those you exploited, and your public confession. He laughed then, a cold sound that didn't belong in a room full of champagne and violins. You think you can threaten me, Mrs. Whittaker? You're just an old woman with a story. The world doesn't listen to people like you. I looked him straight in the eye. They will, because I recorded this conversation the moment you opened your mouth." His confidence cracked. His eyes darted to the waiter, then to the corner of the room where a young woman stood quietly holding her phone. I nodded toward her. "That's Lisa from the Raleigh Herald. She's been covering the case for months. She just live-streamed every word you said." The blood drained from his face completely. He turned toward the exit, but 2 detectives were already there. Deputy Price had driven up from Maple Hollow that morning. I'd called him before I left. It was over before he reached the door. The following week, Vance Financial collapsed under federal investigation. Millions in fraudulent policies traced back to his signature. For the first time, families across the state received restitution. When I testified in court, Vance wouldn't look at me. But I didn't need him to. I didn't need revenge anymore. I'd already won the only battle that mattered, the one for my family's soul. Afterward, I visited Lorraine. She was in a rehabilitation center, pale and quiet, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. "Mama," she whispered, tears in her eyes, "I'm so sorry." I held her hand. "I know, baby, you got lost, but we all do sometimes. The important thing is finding your way back." Derek stood beside us, his eyes glistening. For the first time in years, I felt the warmth of family again, fragile but real. That night, I returned to the farmhouse. The cicadas were singing again, and the porch light flickered the way it always had. I sat down with Franklin's old ledger in my lap and whispered, "We're free now, my love." The wind stirred, soft and slow, like he was answering back. But before I closed the book, I wrote one last line beneath the final name. Justice found them all. 6 months passed after the trials ended, and life in Maple Hollow slowly returned to the kind of quiet that made the heart remember what peace felt like. The winter frost had melted from the fields, and the wildflowers were starting to bloom again. I turned 81 that spring. The farmhouse still stood strong, its white paint chipped by time, its porch creaking like an old friend's laughter. I'd fixed the front gate, planted roses by the steps, and hung a new wind chime by the kitchen window. Every sound that used to haunt me had become music again. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch with Derek, drinking lemonade as the sun dipped below the horizon. He'd taken a job in town at the newspaper, working under Lisa, the same reporter who helped expose Vance. It made me proud to see him rebuild himself, one honest word at a time. As for Lorraine, she was serving her sentence quietly, with good behavior and therapy sessions that helped her face what she'd done. Every Sunday, I'd visit her, bringing homemade biscuits and stories about the neighbors. We didn't talk much about the past. We didn't have to. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened. It just allows love to breathe again. One Sunday, as I was leaving, Lorraine looked at me through the glass. "Mama," she said softly, "how did you do it? How did you survive all that?" I smiled. I stopped waiting for someone to save me, and I started remembering who I was before the world made me small. That night, I drove home under a sky full of stars. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something glowing on the porch. It was an envelope, no name, just a single rose tucked beside it. Inside was a letter. "Mrs. Whitaker, because of your testimony and evidence, the state is reopening 43 cases of fraudulent death claims. Families are receiving restitution, and the program you inspired, the Aliner Fund, will protect seniors from financial exploitation statewide. Thank you for giving us courage. Attorney General's Office." My hands trembled as I read it. Franklin's death had started this story, but somehow his life and mine had saved others. I walked out to the edge of the field where his grave rested under the big oak tree. Fireflies floated like lanterns in the grass, and the air smelled of honeysuckle. I knelt beside his headstone and whispered, "You'd be proud, Franklin. The truth came out. They tried to bury me, but they forgot I'm a seed." The breeze answered with a soft rustle through the leaves. As I stood to leave, I noticed something else, a single feather on the ground, white as snow, resting right where the fire had once nearly taken me. I picked it up and smiled. "I see you, old man." The next morning, I sat on the porch with my journal and began writing my story from the very beginning, not as a confession, but as a reminder. I wanted the world to know that strength doesn't come from age or youth, from power or wealth. It comes from standing up one more time than you were knocked down. And so, I wrote until the sun rose high and warm, and when I was done, I closed the notebook and placed it on the table beside Franklin's ledger. The two books sat side by side, one born from deceit, the other from truth. Together, they told a story that would outlive both of us. That evening, Derek came by and sat next to me. "Grandma," he said, "you ever think about moving closer to town? It'd be easier, safer." I laughed. "Child, I've survived car fires, betrayal, and corporate criminals. I think I can handle a few creaky floorboards." He grinned. "I guess you can." As the last light faded, I looked out over the horizon one more time. The same land that had nearly swallowed me had become my sanctuary again. The world finally knew what happened to Alina Whittaker, but more importantly, I knew who I was. A survivor, a mother, a woman who refused to be erased. And when the wind carried the soft chime of the bells, I felt something deep inside me settle, like a flame that had finally found peace after burning too long. To everyone watching this right now, thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you don't miss the next story of resilience, justice, and hope. And please, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I love knowing where all my kind hearts are listening across this great country. Because somewhere out there, another Alina might be watching. And she needs to know. No fire can destroy a soul that remembers its worth. The end.